The Triumph Daytona 955i, everyone. This is the 2003 model, and today we're going to be doing our classic ride review of this motorcycle. And as far as I'm aware, she is in totally original condition, and man, what shape she is in. Considering her age, and she's done 27,000 miles, so that's not a small amount of mileage by any means, but she does look in very good shape. Doesn't look like she's ever been dropped either. I don't know, but honestly, probably one of the best looking Triumph Daytonas of this era that I've seen. Alright, so in terms of the looks, there are a few things that I don't like. All in all, I do love the shape of this bike. I think it's absolutely gorgeous, and the Daytona font as well. I really like this generation, 2003, 2004. They do change it in the 05 and 06 models. I'm not... it looks a bit like Comic Sans to me. It doesn't really suit the look of the bike, if you ask me. But this bike is very plasticky. Alright, yeah, there are plastics and rubbers where you'd expect, but the fuel tank is plastic. The clutch casing cover is plastic. Round the other side, the stator cover is plastic. The cover for the front sprocket, plastic. There's a lot of plastic pieces to this bike, and I mean, just in case you were thinking that it's just the outside that is plastic, no, the inside of the tank is also plastic. Look at that beigey, plasticky, horrid colour. Well, on the bright side, at least you haven't got to worry about rust in the tank, have you? Alright everyone, so today we're going to put this bike through its paces. We're going to discuss what it's like to ride from an average rider's perspective, what it's capable of, and whether or not I think it's worth you buying one. Alright, but let's jump on and let's have a little listen to the soundtrack. Totally original exhaust, by the way, as far as I'm aware. Alright, I have warmed the bike up. It is a fairly warm day today, but I've warmed her up nonetheless. Here we go. Now, apparently it's quite common for these bikes to struggle on startup. This is a fuel-injected motorcycle. When it is cold or even semi-warm, the idle does seem to run a little bit low, and if you try to rev it from a cold start, straight away I mean, it will probably die on you. But you give it a few seconds, 5 to 10 seconds or so, and it should run absolutely fine. And once it's warmed up a little bit as well, you won't have any problems. It runs really sweet. Once you get past 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, it runs really nicely, but apparently they all do run a little bit rough under 4,000 RPM and idle. Alright, but let's have a little listen. She sounds pretty good, don't you think? Considering this is the stock exhaust, a really lovely sound. Alright everyone, so this review at the start is probably going to sound quite negative, but it does get better. Alright, so starting off with the ergonomics. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable motorcycle I've ever had the pleasure of riding. Seriously, the tank is absolutely huge, the reach of the handlebars is massive, and the foot pegs are sitting quite high. Really good for track day riding. If you want a track bike, this could be a very good choice. But for street riding, I couldn't tour with this bike. I do like to give most bikes the benefit of the doubt, but not today. This bike, I struggle ergonomically with it. Geared quite long as well. I think it can reach like 68 mile an hour in first gear. So geared very long, but power band. Once you get past 9,000 RPM, that's when this bike comes alive. Alright, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. So the digi display here, we've got obviously the traditional tachometer and the digi speedo there. Quite typical of its era. I think my CBR 600RR from 2003 had a very similar looking dashboard to this. It works. It's not the brightest thing in the world. I personally would have preferred to traditional tacks, but you know, this bike was trying to be modern back in the day, and to some extent it is. It does have that look about it. So today I've decided to mount the Insta360 on the other side this time, purely because this is a single swing arm motorcycle. I haven't ridden many of these, but it's actually got some really nice things to look at on both sides. Usually the side you want to be looking at is the side of the exhaust, but the way how the rear end looks, I think that's really neat. But one issue that you have to think about if you're going to buy a single swing arm motorcycle, one is maintenance. Maintenance can be difficult on these bikes if you don't have the correct paddock stand, but having said that, apparently you can jack up the bike. So if you lean it over on the kickstand and jack it up from where the rear shock connects to the swing arm, apparently you can lift the bike up that way as well. I have not tried that yet, but it's obviously always better just to get a proper kickstand for it. But another thing you got to watch out for is the rear wheel bearing. The inside bearing, apparently, because that is the weight bearing side, or most of the weight is on that bearing, you can get some issues if you're not careful. To be honest with you, if there was an issue with the bearing, you would know straight away, because the back end would be so uncontrollable. It would be bouncing all over the place. There'd be a lot of vibrations coming from the back end. And if you've ridden any other bike before, then you'll know what the back end of a motorcycle should feel like. It should be perfectly smooth. But the way to test that is simply just to lift the bike up on a paddock stand and give the wheel a bit of a wiggle and see if it moves. There shouldn't be any movement whatsoever, but if there is, then you know that there may be an issue with the wheel bearings. But for the most part, I mean, this engine apparently is pretty bulletproof. It has stood the test of time. There are quite a lot of these on the road, surprisingly enough. So despite the fact that it's got plastic coming out of every orifice around the engine, apparently the engines are quite decent on these bikes. Pretty solid, at least if they have been well maintained. And when I bought this bike, well, it came with no service history whatsoever. So in true budget bike fashion, I've got no idea how well serviced this bike has been. So, I don't know, it was freshly serviced when I bought it, when I picked it up. So I'm not too worried about it at the moment. The bike seems to run really well. So I'm not too concerned about it yet. But it is one of those things that you should probably ask about when you're looking to buy an old bike. Make sure it comes with a lot of service history, or at least some service history. Alright, but let's talk some specs. This is the 2003 Triumph Daytona 955i. It is a 955cc inline 3-cylinder engine which is producing 145 horsepower at the crank, I want to say, and 100 newton meters of torque, all whilst weighing in around about 200 kilograms wet. So quite similar to the old ZX9, our old channel bike, but we're about to do our classic 0 to 60 runs. What do we think? I mean, gotta be around about that 3-second mark, right? That's my guess. Anyway, here we go. Woo! Okay, that was quite a slow one. I do forget, I think it needs a new clutch because it goes out really far. Alright, here we go. Let's try again. Let's try and get white point. Alright, here we go. We're going so quickly that my helmet visor decided to come down. Alright, let's do one more. Now there's no wheelie control on this bike. This is way too early for that stuff. Here we go. Because this bike will wheelie, and it will wheelie quite hard in first gear. Once you get up to 9,000 RPM, you really jack on that throttle. Yeah, this bike is a pretty good wheelie machine. Let's see if I can demonstrate. Here we go. Yeah, little wheelie there. But yeah, this bike will throttle up without any issue whatsoever. And to be honest, it is quite addictive. See what I mean? Quite an addictive experience indeed, and this is perhaps where this bike comes alive. This is where I think this is I don't know how to describe it. This is where I think this motorcycle actually is amazing. Let's make sure that they can see us. Because despite the fact that it is very ergonomically challenged, very plasticky, you know, there's a lot of negatives about this bike, but that engine and the way it handles as well is second to none. Seriously, this bike handles like an absolute dream. The back end feels incredibly light, and despite the fact that it is weighing over 200 kilograms wet, darting it into corners is very, very straightforward, and it does inspire you with a lot of confidence. But this engine, I adore it. Now, I've ridden 3 cylinders before in the Yamaha XSR 900 GP and the MT-09, and those engines are a hell of a lot of fun as well. But so you know, I do have a healthy appreciation for the 3 cylinders, and this bike is no disappointment either in that regard. Seriously, it is incredibly playful. But I do have a few mods on the way, which woo! Visor came down hard again. I do have some mods that I want to put on the bike to make it even livelier than it already is. An exhaust is on the way, a slip-on exhaust, and I am thinking of maybe changing the gear ratio. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see on that front. I've been looking at a few forums about it, and it is entirely doable. So we will see. But yeah, the riding experience is seriously where this bike gains a lot of brownie points, because the ZX9, our previous channel bike, or should I say our first ever channel bike, that bike had a lot going for it. It had performance, it had comfort, and it was a really fun bike to ride. But even though the ergonomics of this bike I think are harsher than on the ZX9, I think the performance and the excitement that this bike gives me is on another level. So in traditional super sport fashion, not a lot of power at 5,000 RPM. Then again, I mean, it did jump up a little bit there. But once you get off to over 6,000–7,000, yeah, man, it's really good. And I know that it's not that great for street riding in that regard, because you're doing 60–70 mile an hour by the time you reach the power band of the bike. So pretty much anything other than first gear, you're going to be struggling to have fun on this bike. But honestly, I think this bike as a weekend toy, let's close the visor here, I think that as this bike as a weekend toy makes the most sense. But if you plan to do commuting with it, touring with it, riding with your buddies, yeah, I don't think that's what this bike is about, unfortunately. A hell of a lot of fun when you are able to open it up a little bit, but if you ride purely for street use, then yeah, you're going to struggle. You are going to struggle. But I mean, for the era, 11,500 RPM redline, I think it tops out about 12,000 RPM. Quite a high redline for a bike of this era. And yeah, I think in a lot of ways this bike was ahead of its time. Certainly ahead of the ZX9 anyway. But I think this bike had a lot going for it. And I'm not being funny, but Triumph should have called this a 1000i. Alright, if Kawasaki can call a 451cc of 500, then I can call this a 1000. This shares more in common with a 1000 than it does with an 899cc engine. Alright. but same with a 929 Fireblade of the era as well. I think this has got more going for it than a 929 Fireblade, but I've not had a go on one of those yet, so we'll see. Maybe one day I'll get to confirm my suspicions, but it is really fun. I think that's the thing that this bike has got going for it the most, is the fun factor. You really do feel like you're riding a rocket ship, and despite the fact that it hasn't got the most amount of torque in the world, lower down in the RPMs, or here for example, doesn't have a lot of torque. What gear are we in? I think that was 5th gear. Not a lot of torque, but overtaking isn't an issue. That was from 3rd. You know, the thing is, I do find myself being very harsh on bikes these days, especially since doing the bike reviews, because I know what a powerful bike feels like. I know what a fun bike feels like. When a bike isn't fun, I'm gonna say. And the thing is, if I'd have taken this motorcycle out as a ride review from a dealership, I probably would be saying quite negative things about it. But once you get to know the bike, should I say, I think it's got a lot to offer. Especially super sport riders, it really does have a lot to offer. Or maybe, I don't know, you want a weekend toy. This is a really good option for that as well. But it's not going to be your everyday bike. If you are going to buy this, I would recommend either already having a motorcycle that is more comfy, more suited for everyday riding, and or if you haven't, I'd recommend buying another bike alongside this. I'm trying to encourage you to be multi-bike owners, you know what I mean? But seriously, I would recommend something that is a little bit more comfy if you're going to be riding a motorcycle on the daily. This is certainly one of those bikes that you can enjoy thoroughly for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours tops. But honestly, when I was getting this bike home, it was a 2-hour drive away, 2-hour ride away. It was a struggle, a real struggle. I was having to move my butt off the seat loads. I was having to extend my leg out a little bit all the time. I was really struggling with it, and even just now riding for what, half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, this bike is already starting to give me a few aches and pains. But yeah, that's the biggest drawback behind one of these bikes, man. It's just the ergonomics. That's where this bike fails the hardest, is the ergonomics. Everything else, the riding experience, and for me that counts, that has a higher score than ergonomics. The riding experience is second to none. I really enjoy this bike. Now, I think one question we should be asking ourselves is, one, whether or not it's worth it. So how much I pay for this bike. If any of you saw our Eurobike challenge videos, then you'll know how much I paid for it. But then we're also going to say, was it worth me getting rid of the ZX9R to buy this? In retrospect, would I take a ZX9 over this? Okay, so is it worth it? For one, if you're buying one of these, is it worth it? You can get these all day long for about $2 grand, $2.5 grand, with low mileage, exceptional condition. Honestly, I think they are totally worth it. £2,000, there's so much bike for the money. But of course, just make sure you do your research beforehand. Make sure you search for common issues that these bikes may have, all right? I mean, one common issue that this bike does have is that startup issue, as I mentioned earlier, but because once the bike is warmed up, it runs really sweet, runs perfectly. Most riders just ignore it and go about there every day. But it is a bit of a rickety motorcycle. It does kind of sound quite unrefined and what have you, but that does add to the charm of this bike in a lot of ways for me. But okay, I do think it's worth it. If you're looking for one of these, or you're looking for a bike of this caliber at that price range, £2,000, you could even get it a little bit cheaper than that if you're bargain hunting. I think it's absolutely worth it, 100%, no questions asked. Now, the harder question, would I take this over the ZX9? Oh man, that is such a hard one to answer, because honestly, if I was riding both of these bikes, then no, I wouldn't take the ZX9 over this. I think this is a more fun experience. Seriously, even though the ZX9 ergonomically I think was better, and it did run smoother, it was a much smoother engine. Not to say that this bike vibrates a lot. Yeah, there are some vibrations, but it does smooth out quite a lot as you go through the rev range. It's kind of a bit more, I don't know, it's a bit more rough running and a bit more vibraty early in the rev range, say between 1 and 4,000 RPM. But that's it. And to be honest, the everyday riding that you're going to be doing, not a lot of vibration really coming through the bike whatsoever. Brakes wise, I really like the brakes on this bike. I did have to change the brake fluid. The brake fluid was really dark, and honestly guys, if you have a bike and you ever change your brake fluid in a few years, do it. It will make the brake feel so much better, so much more responsive. Seriously. But yeah, if I just ridden both of these bikes, the 955 and the ZX9, side by side, and I rode them for maybe like an hour, then I would have picked the ZX9. But after I've been getting to know this bike, I really think it's better than the ZX9, at least in terms of the riding experience, the performance, all of that kind of stuff, all the stuff that I really care about. It is better, and this is a fuel injected model as well. So yeah, no need to clean or balance carbs, things like that, as you would have to on a ZX9. But I mean, if you're prepared to go through all that, and I mean, it's only a maintenance job you got to do every 4 or 5 years. It's not a big deal really for the most part. But I honestly, like, you could flip a coin. One day I'd be like, yeah, I prefer the ZX9, but more often than not, I think I'd pick this over the ZX9 purely for that riding experience. Yes, I think that the ZX9 would have been far better suited for touring with. If I was going to do a longer journey, I'd prefer to do it on the ZX9 than this. But that's the only real scenario where I'd pick the ZX9 over this. Honestly, I mean, my commutes to work are fairly short, so I could quite happily run this bike commuting every single day to and from work. Yeah, I quite happily do that. But any kind of touring, I don't know, if my commute was, say, over an hour away, nah. This bike, I don't think this bike would be good at journeys like that, an hour and above, to be perfectly frank with you. But I seriously do like this bike, and I am going to enjoy it over this next year. I think this bike, it's my first Euro bike, my first Triumph, my first British bike. I'm actually quite impressed with it. You know, even with the ergonomics kind of bundled in with that, I do seriously love this bike. Alright, let's have a little listen one last time. Very good. I do like it. And I think once I've got an exhaust on it, an aftermarket slip-on exhaust, I think I'm going to like this bike even better. But one other thing to note, the exhaust does hang quite low underneath the bike. I have scraped it a couple of times on speed bumps, so yeah, it is a bit annoying. But I'm talking about like big speed bumps that come up to about that high. I mean, if you're going to try and get the bike over a curb, you probably have a similar issue. But I really like it. Despite its flaws, I think it's a fantastic motorcycle, and I'm really happy with it so far. But you guys let me know what you think of the Triumph Daytona 955i. Have you had one of these bikes before, or maybe you're still running one today? Let me know what you think of it down in the comment section below. And if you're looking to buy one of these, well, I hope today's video has helped you out, but we do plan to do a lot of content around this bike over the next 12 months. But thank you ever so much for watching this one. As always, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this video rather, If you enjoyed this ride out with me, then go ahead and leave that like, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any more videos on the Triumph Daytona 955i. And we'll catch you all in the next video. Everyone, take care. Ride safe.